The message arrived at 11:47 p.m. on a Thursday, the kind of hour that belongs to silence and half-formed thoughts. She was already under the covers, the room dark except for the soft spill of streetlight through the curtains. Lucas slept beside her, one arm flung across his face the way he always did. Once something she had loved, now just another detail she registered without feeling. Like the faint crack in the ceiling she had stopped meaning to fix. Her phone lit up the room in a sudden, intrusive glow. She reached for it automatically, eyes narrowing against the brightness, expecting nothing, prepared for nothing. Then she saw the name, something shifted inside her chest. Sharp, unfamiliar, not quite pain, not quite recognition, just something that refused to be named. The message was brief, efficient. Detached Diane Calloway's assistant. Not Diane herself, a clean ending wrapped in polite professionalism, a relocation to New York, a contract concluding at the end of the month, gratitude for her exceptional service. Mara read it once, then again, slower, as if the meaning might rearrange itself if she gave it enough time. It didn't. She turned the phone face down on the nightstand and stared up at the ceiling, her body very still, as if movement might make something collapse. Beside her, Lucas shifted slightly, murmured something unintelligible, and settled back into sleep. He didn't wake, he didn't notice. She didn't move because what she felt wasn't simple, and it wasn't something she could explain. Not to her sister, not to her best friend, not even to the carefully constructed version of herself she presented to the world each morning. She wasn't grieving the loss of a client, she was unraveling over the loss of her, and for 3 months she had pretended those things were separate, professional, contained, safe. They weren't. They had never been. That realization would come later, slowly, painfully, like something surfacing after being buried on purpose. But it began here, in the dark, with a message that said everything without saying anything at all. Mara Vega was 31, the kind of organized that doesn't come naturally but is carved out of chaos. She had learned early how to impose order on disorder, how to make spaces feel steady even when people weren't. It was more than a skill. It was survival refined into a profession. She built her business from nothing. 2 small clients in Pasadena, then more through quiet recommendations, then better ones, and eventually a carefully curated list of 12 households scattered across Los Angeles. Doctors, architects, people with money and complicated lives. People who needed their homes to feel like something softer than the rest of their world. She wasn't wealthy. She was stable, and she understood the difference in a way that only someone who had once been neither ever could. Lucas fit into that stability. He was kind, dependable, attentive in all the ways that were supposed to matter. He cooked dinner on Thursdays, remembered how she took her coffee, loved her without complication, without intensity, without the sharp edges that come from being broken and rebuilt. It was a good relationship, she told herself that often, especially on nights when she lay awake beside him, staring into the dark, trying to understand why something that was good, objectively, undeniably good, could sometimes feel like being sealed inside a room with no windows. She met Diane Calloway on a Tuesday in January. The referral came with a warning disguised as a recommendation. Difficult but worth it. Triple the pay. A house that made an impression. Mara drove up into the Malibu hills and paused in her car before stepping out, taking in the structure perched above the ocean. It wasn't just large or expensive. It was unapologetic. Glass and pale stone arranged with the confidence of something that didn't need approval. It looked permanent in a way people never were. Inside, the air carried eucalyptus, leather, and something faintly saline, like the ocean had found its way in and decided to stay. Diane was already drinking when Mara arrived. Not messy, not careless, just slightly unguarded, like someone who had given herself permission to loosen her grip for a few hours. Her hair was down, which Mara would later learn was unusual. She stood barefoot on cold stone floors, still dressed in what looked like a day's worth of authority. A silk blouse that belonged in boardrooms, not evenings at home. She was 43, self-made in the way that leaves marks you can't see at first glance. The kind of success built from pressure, persistence, and an unwillingness to fail quietly. Her company was in the middle of a very public acquisition battle, and everything about her carried that tension, contained, sharpened, controlled, and she was striking. Not in a soft, approachable way, but in something more precise, deliberate, like design rather than accident. Cleaning person, Diane said when Mara entered, her tone neutral, unfiltered. Home manager, Mara corrected, a pause. A flicker of something almost like amusement. Fair enough. There was an offer of a drink, casual but intentional. "I'm working," Mara replied. "So am I." That should have been the first sign. Nothing about this would stay ordinary. The house itself reflected a mind that prioritized everything except maintenance. Books spread across every surface, not staged but used. Left open, stacked, abandoned mid-thought. A kitchen outfitted with precision and expense but almost no food. A study that looked chaotic to anyone else but functioned on a system only Diane understood. And that system was not to be touched. "Even if it looks like a disaster," Diane said, watching her closely. "A working disaster." Mara nodded. She understood boundaries. She built her work around them, but she also noticed things. That was unavoidable, Diane's intensity, the way she observed before speaking, the way her attention felt less like casual awareness and more like assessment. "You're very calm," Diane remarked. "I'm working." That almost smile again. Brief. Controlled, the first month passed in routine. Scheduled visits, predictable tasks. Learning the house, its patterns, its quiet demands. But you can't spend that much time inside someone's space without beginning to understand them. Mara learned Diane through absence and residue. Through coffee cups left in a trail from room to room, evidence of long hours and restless movement. Through the shifting placement of papers, the subtle changes in furniture that revealed where she had collapsed into sleep rather than chosen it. She worked too much, slept too little, ate like it was an obligation, and sometimes on the phone with her sister, her voice softened, just slightly, but enough to reveal something unguarded beneath everything else. Loneliness, maybe. Or something close to it, Mara noticed. Filed it away, kept it separate. The second month didn't change all at once. It shifted in small, almost unremarkable ways. Diane started being home more often. Not interfering, not engaging, just present, on calls. At her desk. A constant awareness in the background. Nothing happened, and yet everything felt different. Because presence changes a space. Because awareness becomes its own kind of tension. One afternoon, a call went badly. Mara could hear it without meaning to. The clipped tone, the restraint stretched thin. When it ended, the silence that followed felt heavier than the conversation itself. Diane appeared in the kitchen, saying nothing at first. Just standing there, as if recalibrating. Then, abruptly, "Do you know anything about acquisitions?" "No good." A glass of water, half gone in one motion. "I'm tired of people who think they do." Mara kept working. Not out of indifference, but because she understood something instinctively. Some silences are not meant to be filled. Then Diane spoke again, quieter this time, more like she was testing the truth of it as she said it. "You're easy to be around. Not praise. Not quite. An observation." Mara paused just for a moment, the weight of that statement settling somewhere she didn't immediately examine. Then she continued working, as if nothing had shifted at all. "You make it easy," she said, and the moment the words left her mouth, she wished she could take them back. Not because they weren't true, but because they were. Diane paused, her gaze settling on Mara with that same precise assessing focus, as if weighing not just the statement but everything beneath it. For a second, it felt like being seen too clearly. Then Diane simply nodded, refilled her glass, and disappeared back into the study as if nothing had shifted at all. Mara finished the cabinet, wiped her hands, and stood at the counter longer than necessary, her eyes drifting out toward the ocean. The horizon stretched endlessly, calm and indifferent, and she told herself, firmly, repeatedly, that it meant nothing. It stayed nothing, or at least, it wore that disguise well, because some things don't arrive fully formed. They build quietly, almost politely, while you insist they aren't building at all. They started talking more, not every time. Not enough to feel obvious. Just often enough that it became a pattern you could ignore if you tried hard enough. Diane would appear in a doorway, lean there like she had nowhere more urgent to be, and say something. About the acquisition, about a difficult board member, about a book she'd finished at 3 a.m. because sleep had refused her again. And Mara would answer, and somehow, without either of them acknowledging it, 15 minutes would disappear. Mara began noticing things she hadn't allowed herself to notice before. Small details, precise and uninvited. The way Diane laughed, rare but sudden, like it surprised even her when it happened. The absent gesture of pushing her hair back when she was thinking. The deliberate way she said Mara's name at the start of a sentence, as if choosing it, as if choosing her attention, not casual. Not accidental. Intentional. Mara, like it mattered that it was her. She mentioned Diane to Lucas once lightly, like it was nothing more than a passing anecdote. A client in Malibu with an incredible view. A complicated corporate situation. Interesting, in a distant, harmless way. Lucas nodded, sympathetic in the way he always was. Sounds stressful. It is, and that was it. The conversation ended where it was supposed to. Clean. Appropriate. But later, lying beside him in the dark, Mara felt an odd, restless dissatisfaction she couldn't justify. Nothing had been wrong with the exchange. Nothing had been missing. And yet something had. By the third month, the explanation started to fall apart. It was a Friday evening, later than usual. A small repair had thrown off her schedule, stretched the day into something longer and looser than she preferred. Diane was on the terrace, laptop open, a glass of wine within reach, the last light of the day settling around her. The sky was doing that impossible thing Malibu skies do. Layered color, orange melting into violet, the ocean reflecting it all back in muted fragments. Mara stepped outside to say she was leaving. Diane looked up. Stay for a minute. Not a request, not quite an instruction. Something in between Mara should have declined. She had reasons ready, routine, distance, the life waiting for her elsewhere. Instead she sat. They didn't speak at first. Just watched the light fade, the ocean moving below them in its slow, unconcerned rhythm. I think I'm going to lose, Diane said eventually, her voice quieter than usual. Mara didn't pretend not to understand. The acquisition? A small nod. They're going to win. There were expected responses, comforting, dismissive, optimistic. Mara knew them all. She chose none of them. What happens if they do? Diane was still for a moment, the question landing somewhere deeper than the situation itself. I built it, she said finally. Every part of it, and someone else is going to take it and run it wrong. And I won't be able to stop them. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't dramatize it. That made it heavier. That sounds lonely, Mara said. Diane turned then, fully, her attention narrowing, focusing. The silence stretched between them, charged in a way that wasn't loud but undeniable. Yeah, she said softly. It does. Something shifted in that space, subtle but irreversible. Like pressure changing before a storm, something you feel before you understand. Mara drove home with the radio off, her hands steady on the wheel, her thoughts anything but. There was a feeling rising inside her, something insistent, something she refused to examine too closely. She refused to name it. She had a good life. A stable one. A man who loved her in ways that made sense, in ways that were easy to explain. She was not going to name it, so she did everything else. She cleaned things that were already clean, rearranged spaces that didn't need rearranging, found reasons to stay busy, to move, to avoid stillness, avoid thinking. And yet she became acutely aware of Diane's presence in the house, the sound of her on calls, the rhythm of her typing, the quiet movement from room to room. Without realizing it, Mara began orienting herself around those sounds, using them to locate her the way you instinctively find north. She called Lucas during the day, twice sometimes. Something she never did before. He sounded pleased, surprised in a gentle way that made her chest tighten for reasons she didn't examine. She mentioned Diane to her friend Gabby, framing it carefully. A client going through something difficult, hard to watch. You seem really invested, Gabby said. She's a person, Mara replied quickly. I just feel bad. Okay, Gabby said, in a tone that suggested she understood more than she was saying. Mara didn't ask. She didn't want the answer, because pretending something isn't happening requires effort. Constant, deliberate effort. And Mara was spending more energy on that pretense than she wanted to admit. It started showing. She was quieter at home, more distant in ways she disguised as fatigue. Lucas noticed, of course he did. Asked if she was okay. She said she was tired. He made her tea. Moved through their kitchen with easy familiarity, steady and present in a way that had always grounded her before. She watched him, his hands, the small habitual movements, and felt something tighten in her chest. Guilt, unclear. Unearned, because she hadn't done anything. Not really. One afternoon, in the 4th month, she arrived to find the front door unlocked. Diane didn't answer when she called out. Mara stepped inside, moving through the quiet until she found her in the study, asleep on the couch. Laptop still open. One shoe half off, completely unaware of the world around her. For a moment Mara just stood there. Diane looked different like this, softer, stripped of the sharp, controlled energy she carried when awake. Younger, somehow, and undeniably exhausted. Something inside Mara gave way. Quietly, but completely, she retrieved a blanket, draped it carefully over her, and left the room without a sound. Work filled the next 40 minutes. Or rather, she let it. When Diane finally woke, She appeared in the hallway wrapped in that same blanket, hair disheveled, expression briefly unguarded. "Did you? You were cold," Mara said, not looking up from what she was doing, a pause. "Thank you," Diane said, softer than Mara had ever heard her. Mara glanced up despite herself. Diane was looking at her differently, not analyzing, not measuring, recognizing. Mara dropped her gaze again, retreating into the safety of movement routine. "I'll turn the AC down before I leave." They didn't speak about it again. They didn't need to, because something had already shifted, quietly, gradually, irreversibly. The last day that still felt normal came 3 weeks later. A Tuesday, Diane was sitting at the kitchen table, a newspaper spread out in front of her, an unusual sight. She looked up when Mara entered, and her expression was simple in a way Mara hadn't seen before. Not professional, not polite, just glad. Morning. And in that moment, with nothing overtly said or done, Mara understood something with startling clarity. She was in trouble, not because Diane had crossed a line. She hadn't, not because anything inappropriate had happened. It hadn't, but because somewhere along the way, Diane had started seeing her, not as a role, not as a function, but as a specific person. And Mara had started needing that, wanting it. And that alone was enough to unravel everything she thought she had under control. She had been with Lucas for 3 years. They shared a home, a routine, a life that made sense on paper and in practice. And she was completely unprepared for the fact that something else, something unnamed, uninvited, and undeniable, had begun to exist alongside it. She had built a life with clean lines and deliberate choices, something measured and stable, something that made sense when you looked at it from the outside. Every piece had been selected for a reason. Every part fit. This didn't. It existed outside logic, outside planning, outside the quiet rules she had followed for years. And she had no idea what to do with something that refused to be explained. So she did the only thing she knew how to do when something didn't make sense. She kept moving. She kept showing up on Tuesdays and Fridays. Kept restoring order to a house that unraveled faster than it could be maintained. Windows that stuck, cups that wandered, surfaces that needed returning to themselves. She kept her hands busy, her mind occupied, her focus carefully directed outward. And she kept talking to Diane. Conversations that stretched just a little too long, that carried a little too much weight, that lingered after they ended in ways she refused to examine too closely. At night, she lay beside Lucas, staring into the dark, aware of something pressing against her from the inside, shapeless but insistent. Something she refused to define, as if naming it would make it real in a way she couldn't undo. One night, Lucas asked her if she was happy. It wasn't dramatic, no build-up, no warning. Just a quiet question dropped into the space between them. But it hadn't come from nowhere. Not really. It came from watching her drift, from noticing the way she was present without fully being there, from months of something he couldn't quite articulate until now. She turned her head and looked at him. His expression was open, uncertain, touched with something that looked a lot like fear, the kind that comes from asking a question you're not sure you want answered. "I'm tired," she said. "It's just been busy." He accepted it. Of course he did. Nodded, let her turn away, let the moment pass without pressing. He fell asleep. She didn't. She lay awake until the night stretched thin, replaying the question, circling the answer she hadn't given. And sometime after 2 a.m, the truth settled into place with quiet, unavoidable clarity. The question wasn't about Lucas. The answer wasn't about him either. It was about her, about who she was becoming without noticing, in a house perched above the Pacific, in conversations that felt increasingly like something she depended on more than she should. It was about the way Diane looked at her, not vaguely, not politely, but with a kind of focus that made her feel singular, not interchangeable, chosen. She had never had that before. Or maybe she had once, in some smaller, less defined way, but never like this, never this clear, never this impossible to ignore. For 3 years, she had believed she didn't need it. Now she wasn't so sure. So she avoided the thought, redirected it, buried it under routine and responsibility, and the steady rhythm of a life that still technically worked. Until Wednesday, she wasn't supposed to be there that day. She had been driving back toward the freeway when she realized she'd left her phone charger behind, sitting on the kitchen counter. It was a small, practical reason to turn around. Something ordinary, something harmless. She went back, knocked. No answer. Used her key. The house was quiet, but not silent. Music drifted through it. Something older, unfamiliar. carrying a rhythm that didn't belong to anything she associated with Diane. She retrieved the charger from the kitchen. That should have been the end of it. Instead, she followed the sound. It pulled her toward the terrace, toward the open doors and the light spilling in from outside. And there, without performance, without awareness, was Diane dancing alone, eyes closed, completely unguarded, moving in a way that had nothing to do with precision or control. There was no strategy in it, no calculation. Just movement, unfiltered and free, as if for a moment she had stepped outside the version of herself the world required. It wasn't graceful in any technical sense. It didn't need to be. It was real in a way that made everything else feel constructed. Mara stopped in the doorway. She should have made a sound. Should have announced herself. Restored the boundary that had always existed between them. She didn't. She stayed where she was and watched. Watched this woman who built companies and fought battles and carried herself like something unbreakable. Watched her exist without any of that, just for a moment. No edges, no armor, no audience. And something inside Mara shifted, not violently. Not all at once, but completely. Like a door that had been locked from the inside finally giving way, opening without resistance because it had already been unlocked long before she noticed. At some point, something must have given her away. A shift in air, a quiet step. Something instinctual. Diane's eyes opened. They found each other across the space. The music didn't stop. For a fraction of a second, there was something like embarrassment on Diane's face, but it didn't stay. It changed, settled into something more searching, more aware, a question without words. "Charger," Mara said, lifting it slightly, her voice steady in a way she held on to like control, a small pause. "Right," Diane said. Neither of them moved. "I should." Mara started. "Do you want to stay for dinner?" The words came quickly, almost before Diane had fully decided to say them. And this was different. Different from the conversations, from the shared silences, from every moment that had come before. Because there was something in her voice now. Something tentative, something that acknowledged the space between them and stepped into it anyway. Something that understood exactly what it was asking. Mara looked at her, at this woman who had, without announcement or permission, become the clearest point in her week. The one she thought about when she wasn't there, then deliberately tried not to. The one she had begun measuring everything else against without meaning to. "I can't," Mara said softly. Not refusal, not distance. Something closer to recognition, as if the word carried everything she couldn't say directly. Not won't, not shouldn't, can't, because she understood what came after if she said yes. Diane heard it. Of course she did. She nodded once. Okay. And that was all. Mara left. She made it halfway home before pulling into a gas station, the engine idling, her hands resting uselessly in her lap. 10 minutes passed in a kind of suspended stillness, where she refused to follow any thought all the way through. Then she drove the rest of the way, back to Lucas, back to the version of her life that still held together. They made dinner, watched something forgettable, moved through the motions of normalcy with practiced ease. And then, at 11:47 p.m., her phone lit up in the dark. A message. Clean. Final. Diane Calloway was relocating to New York. Permanently, the contract would end at the close of the month. She read it beside the man who loved her. The words settling with a quiet finality that left no room for reinterpretation. And in that moment, something inside her dropped away completely. No more distance. No more denial. No more pretending, because now there was nothing left to protect herself from. What she had refused to name for 4 months finally stood in front of her, clear and unavoidable, and this time she understood it. You can keep something at a distance for a long time. You can organize your days so it never quite comes into focus, explain it away in smaller, more manageable pieces, let it live just outside the center of your attention where it can't fully take shape. But the moment it's gone, truly gone, you understand it all at once. Not by what it was, but by the space it leaves behind. And the space it left in Mara was vast. She returned to the house on Friday for the last time, not as anything complicated, not as anything unresolved, just to work. That was the agreement she made with herself. She would do what she always did. She would move through the rooms, restore order, complete the tasks. She would finish cleanly. The house was already in transition. Boxes had appeared in the study, stacked carefully but not completely. Not the desk, never the desk, but books, objects, fragments of a life being gathered and labeled. The walls were starting to empty. The hallway held neat piles marked for movers. The space felt different, as if something essential had already begun to lift out of it, leaving only the structure behind. It was becoming a house again, instead of Diane's house. Mara worked methodically, room by room, giving each space the same attention she always had. Every surface, every detail, every small imperfection corrected. It was the only way she knew how to hold herself steady, through precision, through completion, through the quiet certainty of a job done properly. Diane stayed in the study most of the morning, working as if nothing had changed, as if everything hadn't already shifted beyond repair. At noon, she stepped into the kitchen and stopped. Mara turned. They looked at each other across a space that felt both familiar and entirely altered. "You didn't have to come in," Diane said. "I could have sent the final payment." "I know." The simplicity of the answer lingered between them. "Mara," Diane said, her name deliberate, chosen the way it always was. "Don't," Mara replied softly. Not sharp, not defensive. Just a boundary placed carefully where it needed to be. "Please." Diane fell quiet. Mara looked down at the cloth in her hands, realizing she had stopped moving without noticing. "I have a life," she said, the words steady but carrying more weight than she expected. "I have someone. I have things that work, things I built." She lifted her gaze, meeting Diane's. "You understand that." Something shifted across Diane's expression. Not disagreement, not dismissal, but recognition. "I do," she said. Mara exhaled, but it didn't feel like relief. "I'm not." She started, then stopped, searching for something more precise. "I don't know what I am. I just know what I have." The distinction mattered. It was the closest thing to truth she could manage, and it felt heavier than anything else she had said. Diane stepped closer, not enough to cross a line, but enough to remove the distance that had always protected them. She didn't hide anything now. Not the understanding, not the restraint, not the quiet acceptance of what this was and what it wasn't going to become. "I know," she said. "I'm not asking you for anything." A pause, brief but deliberate. "I just need you to know that this," she gestured lightly between them, "was real. For me." The words settled in Mara's chest, sharp and undeniable. "It matters," she said. And it did. They stood there, suspended in a moment that already belonged to the past, the ocean stretching endlessly beyond the windows, indifferent to everything unfolding inside. Then Mara returned to her work. She finished the house the way she always did, with care, with attention, with nothing left undone. When she was finished, she packed her supplies, moved through each room one last time, checking, confirming, closing every small loop. Everything was complete. At the front door, Diane was waiting, not positioned, not deliberate, just present. As if the ending required witnessing, as if leaving without that would make it incomplete. Mara stopped a few steps away. They stood close, not crossing into anything inappropriate, just held there by the simple geometry of the doorway, the necessity of proximity before departure. "New York is good," Mara said finally, reaching for something ordinary because anything else felt too exposed. "It's fine," Diane replied, a faint echo of a smile touching her expression. "I've been there before. You'll fight them there too. That's the plan." Mara nodded, her attention fixed on Diane's face, memorizing it without meaning to. The structure of it, the angles, the way the afternoon light fell across her features. The kind of remembering that happens when you already know you won't get another chance. There were things she could have said, questions she could have asked, possibilities she could have acknowledged. She didn't. "Take care of yourself," she said instead. "Actually take care of yourself. Eat. Sleep." Diane laughed then, brief and unguarded, the sound landing somewhere deep and lingering. "I'll try." Mara adjusted the strap of her bag, a small, practical signal that the moment was ending. "Goodbye, Diane." "Goodbye, Mara." For 1 second longer than necessary, neither of them moved. In that second, everything existed fully, clear, unspoken, understood. Then Mara turned and walked out. She drove down the hill and stopped at the bottom, the engine still running, her hands resting loosely in her lap. The ocean stretched behind her in the rearview mirror, flat and silver under the fading light. She didn't cry. Not because there was nothing to feel, but because whatever she felt hadn't settled into something that could be released yet. Her thoughts moved in quiet circles. Lucas, at home or on his way, steady and consistent, waiting in the life that had always made sense. Diane, still up in the house, surrounded by boxes, already shifting toward whatever came next. And herself suspended somewhere between those two realities, no longer certain where she belonged. "I don't know what I am," she thought. And then, almost immediately after, "I think I need to find out." She didn't know what that meant. Didn't know what it would require or what it might break or reveal. Didn't know if the answer would dismantle something she loved or finally open something she had kept closed for years. She only knew one thing with absolute clarity. What had existed between her and Diane had been real, not imagined, not exaggerated. Real in the quiet, specific way that changes you without asking permission. In that house above the Pacific, in the spaces between conversations. In the way her name had been spoken like a deliberate choice. Something in her had been seen. Not the version of her built for stability and function and keeping things in order. The other part, the one beneath. The one she had nearly forgotten while maintaining everything else. That had to matter. Even if she didn't know how yet. She started the car again and pulled onto the highway, heading back toward a life that suddenly felt less certain than it had that morning. Some stories don't resolve, they expand. They open into something unfinished, something still forming. Mara drove away from the house on the cliff without knowing who she would be on the other side of what she had just understood. She wasn't ready, she might not be for a while. And that didn't make it wrong. Not everything arrives with clarity. Not everything comes with instructions. Some doors stay closed until you realize they were never locked at all. And even then, opening them is a choice you have to grow into. And somewhere ahead of her, whether she was ready or not, that choice was waiting.